How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Here just a few weeks back we had the 4th of July, and about a month before that we had the anniversary of D-Day. Anytime I get into doing my reloading, whether it's for my modern stuff or even for my milsurps, one of the number one things you'll find me doing is listening to podcasts while I do it, or YouTube videos. I really enjoy listening to World War II history, World War I, and the U.S. Civil War. In particular, I really like watching people do comparison videos. It's really fun to hear the different opinions, one way or the other, some of the development history and whatnot, and what the GI side of each particular firearm if they came across it. When you listen to history on YouTube, especially World War II history, something that's been covered a lot in media, movies, video games, and stuff like that. When you listen to the history side of that on YouTube, you'll notice there's two completely opposite sides of the spectrum. On some gun channels or history YouTube channels, they're very deep into the documentary, or you could almost call it like the lore. A lot of them, they'll shoot a lot of they'll do a lot of practical shooting with World War II firearms, and a lot of their history comes from things they've heard, movies they watched, or a lot of them got into the hobby based off of a movie or a video game, and that's completely cool. I'm one of them. World War I, Battlefield 1, I know that's going to tick a lot of World War I reenactors off, but that video game did reignite my inner history buff and want to learn about World War I and stuff like that. But you'll notice that side of the history YouTube will repeat a lot of common myths, a lot of common misconceptions, and they're not really doing it on purpose. They're just doing what they know, and they don't know a lot of the real deeper history behind things to debunk a lot of those myths. On the other side, you have the YouTube history channels that are extremely intellectually based. They really want to outline everything as it was, and they want everything correct down to the minute detail because it tells the best true story of what happened. And I really enjoy listening to that side as well. Those guys are awesome, and without them we won't learn the true nature of history, which a lot of times is very boring. They really focus on primary resources, and they want to tell the story of what actually happened without any sensational anecdotes and stuff like that. They want to take the human factor of telling the story out as much as they can. And without those guys, we would only ever hear what our schools and popular history wants us to know. They'll tell us things maybe we don't want to hear. Both sides have their value. Without thinking that history is cool, you'll never get over to the intellectual side. And without the intellectual side, you'll only hear anecdotes or myths that people keep repeating. And unless you really know what you're talking about or you have experience with things, you may not be able to decipher what is true and what is just lore. I did notice that the intellectual, some people will call them the Redditor side of history, and the traditional World War II documentary movie watching types, they both will kind of repeat a similar narrative, which I found is really interesting. A lot of them will repeat the narrative that the U.S., besides certain firearms, were way behind the game. They were not as advanced as the Germans and whatnot. And I wanted to do this video series to kind of start talking about that and see, both from practical and historical evidence, how true that may or may not be. So with this series, we'll go through firearms that I have experience with, and I know people that have had experience in field with some of them. And we will go through whether the modern narrative or the old school narrative rang true, or if that truth, as funny as it is, will be somewhere in the middle. So in this episode, what we're going to cover is the two main cast members of World War II on the European theater. The infantry rifles, two rifles that were the most responsible for taking and or losing ground. The Kar98K was adopted in 1935. It is very indicative of the early, really nice models before they started ramping up wartime production. They'll get rougher and rougher as you look at the date codes and start seeing the changes they made to these and whatnot. And the Kar98K is just an ultimate refinement of that Kar98AZ concept, in my opinion. The Kar98K with its 24-inch barrel is about optimal in the cartridge it was chambered in. The Kar98K is chambered in the 8x57 Mauser. This is a .323 inch diameter bullet. This particular ammunition is what they would have been issued during World War II, which is a 177 grain bullet going at 2,530 feet per second, give or take. When I did my velocity testing on these, they were about 25-50 feet per second, give or take. The projectile has a steel core inside of the copper and lead jacket for a little bit better armor penetration. There isn't a modern example that really gets close, so I can get an accurate G1 ballistic coefficient rating. Things around this, such as the 180 grain Nosler ballistic tip, right at 0.40 or right at 0.400 ballistic G1 ballistic coefficient. The 170 Hornady SST advertises like a 0.425 G1 BC. Length, weight, and all that, it matches a little bit closer to that Hornady SST. This is a fairly sleek bullet. With my personal experience trying to match the BC to what I'm getting downrange, it'd be right at 0.400, 0.410 in that ballpark. We also have what they would have been issued later in the war when brass cases started getting scarce. The material to make them was scarce. They switched to a steel alloy case with a lacquer coating. When we talk about the MG42 and the MG34, that's how detrimental the steel casing was at the time. But that's another video. So a heavy bullet, shooting slow with a fairly decent ballistic coefficient. It's not the greatest, but it's very good for it's very good for the time. Now we'll introduce my second cast member. This is my 1942 Springfield Armory M1 Garand. This particular one, from the research I've done, there's a serial number stamped on the stock right here. That could have been a US thing, but the numbers and how they're configured are very indicative of a Greek export rifle, a rifle that we sent over to Greece after the war for aid and whatnot. So I'm fairly certain that's where this one ended up. May have been used in Korea, probably not. As clean of a rifle as it is, it probably just, sat in training, had a lot of guys get trained on it, do their marksmanship, drills and whatnot, and somehow made its way back to the U.S. on the surplus market. It is the first and probably one of the most fantastic battle rifles there were. The M1 Garand was adopted in 1936, and boy did it meet a lot of controversy. The Marine Corps and some of the higher end shooters in the Army, they were really, really concerned about the accuracy potential out of these rifles. There were others who were really scared about ammo conservation and the reliability that this platform was going to offer. But once the GIs started using them in country, it became a universal favorite. The only few exceptions are really the real small statured guys where it was quite a bit to carry. This rifle is a little bit heavier than the Kar98K. The Kar98K is right about 8 pounds. The M1 Garand fully loaded is 9 or 10, give or take. And yes, I said Garand. The rifle is known as the M1 Garand, M1 Garand, or U.S. Rifle Caliber 30 M1. And the whole argument behind what you call it, it's just for some people to feel like they sound smarter than they are. We really know what we're talking about, so I'm not pedantic about that. Most of that's just bullshit. The M1 Garand fires the M2 ball cartridge, which is a .308 inch diameter bullet, 150 grains going at 2,700 feet per second. The closest projectile we have, we make plenty of them. This is a Hornady example, has a .398 ballistic coefficient, and with my hand loads, that matches about what the spec would have been. I have not shot any of these period cartridges because I have this one unopened box of them. You can see where it's seen its better days, but at one point it was probably in better condition than where I found it. So the M2 ball cartridge out of the M1 Garand, a little bit faster bullet, lighter bullet, but it has a similar ballistic coefficient, which means it will retain its energy similar to the 8x57 Mauser. The 8x57 Mauser will start off with about 2,500 foot-pounds, whereas the M2 ball will start out with 2,400 foot-pounds. But the whole energy thing is kind of getting debunked these days. It doesn't really mean a whole lot, but it lets you know there's definitely a difference in the kinetic energy going down range. That's where we'll transition over to shootability, as far as my opinion. The M1 Garand is an absolute sweetheart to shoot. This rifle, I've handed it to multiple different people, a wife, kids on the range, they see it, and you know, as part of being a ambassador for the Second Amendment and just World War II history in general, anytime a kid asks me if he could shoot it, it's absolutely no questions asked. Shoot as much as you want. You can blow my whole ammo case if you want, you know, have as much fun as you want. But very, very easy to shoot, very soft shooting. You can load it down, but from what I've noticed, it doesn't make that much of a difference. You still have the cycle of the action, you still have the loud bang, but for the most part, even with full powered ammunition, it's very, very easy for smaller stature shooters to get around. The Kar98K, on the other hand, this gun will teach you recoil control. If this is your first military surplus firearm or your first full powered rifle, eventually you will learn to shoot it well, and you'll shoot everything around it even better. Shooting the first couple of CMP vintage rifle matches that I've shot with this, it was very much, hey, you better lean into this thing or you're going to feel it even more than you already do. And there's plenty of anecdotes during the war of some of the more seasoned GIs who weren't as keen to recoil. They would avoid shooting it if they could. There's some people that would even set a round limit per day, like they would only shoot X amount of rounds before they kind of just stick it over the wall and go bang kind of deal, because it was a handful. I will say the stock design in this, if you're a shorter statured shooter, it's not that bad to shoot. Me being a very tall person and have an abnormally large neck, my cheek kind of tends to rest right here at the tip of the comb, and it's kind of a black eye maker. I have to really, you know, consciously tell myself, hey, back off a little bit when you shoot, or you're going to be feeling your cheek as well as your shoulder. Not unmanageable. Like I said, once you get good at shooting this, you will shoot other things great. You'll shoot other rifles great, but it is quite a bit to hold on to. When it comes to firepower, the M1 Garand takes the cake there. It's semi-automatic. That relatively fast cartridge cycles the action just perfectly. It's almost like it's the perfect gas system. It makes even double tapping. There's some guys, I'm sure, like Grantham and whatnot, have shown, you know, shooting these things fast. And if you ever shoot like a CMP vintage rifle match or something like that, and you do the rapid fire, it is very easy to shoot it effectively with a very, very fast rate of fire. The Kar98K, if you get trained with bolt actions and you really know how to work that bolt, you can definitely shoot fast, but it's not the same, and your follow-up shots are a lot longer. That split second really can make a difference, being able to tap that trigger one more time with the sights relatively on target versus the bolt action. Like I said, you can learn to shoot it fast, but you're not going to keep up. It takes quite a bit of training to even come close to matching the rate of fire. And the M-block clip, reloading that once you're empty, much, much easier than using stripper clips. You can get good with stripper clips just like you can get good with working that bolt, but it still really doesn't compare. And when we get into doctrine, The Germans and their light machine guns and whatnot, they really focused on fighting around the machine gun. Machine gun was doing the laying down the support and the cover while the infantry advanced, and if they didn't have that machine gun up and running, they kind of knew we either halt the advance or take our time until that machine gun can get back up to cover us. The M1 Garand, as fast as it shoots and easy as it is to reload, that fire and maneuver became a more fluid concept, whereas with the Germans it was more fluid than anybody else, but still not quite to the same level. One claim that I have heard, and we'll get into the accuracy discussion of my particular examples and of what the militaries required of their GIs. My Kar98K with almost all ammunition shoots extremely well. It's very rare when I'm shooting the Kar98K with a variety of ammunition that I don't get at least 3 minute angle at 100 yards, 3 inches or so. With my more Gucci hand loads that I do for hunting and whatnot, I can dial that down to about 2 MOA, 2.5, give or take. So this example is extremely accurate compared to the average. There are some people that I've heard that shoot these rifles and they can be quite atrocious. The later war models had issues with the laminated stocks, and some of the stocks that they had weren't quite seasoned enough to build rifles just yet. And so you had issues with bedding and stuff like that. That does affect accuracy quite a bit once you start doing the looking into it. Also, the barrel twist, I don't know if it's the way they cut their barrels, but I have noticed that some of them will be really, really finicky with different weights of ammunition. This particular barrel shoots everything. Like, I have some of those 123 grain full metal jackets for like the 8x33 Kurs that went into the Sturmgewehr. It shoots those fantastic and makes this gun quite a bit more palatable to shoot. And up to the 200 grains, it shoots those extremely well. I shot a lot of the 200 grain bow tie hollow points from PPU at competitions, and they were fantastic as well. This is my sample size of 1. Your results may vary and may be more indicative of the platform than mine. My M1 Garand is roughly a 3 MOA gun, maybe a little bit more at 100 yards. And the M1, I have shot it at an EIC match before, and I was nowhere near competitive compared to the modern ARs, but when you're hitting that black at 500 yards with open sights, even if you're dancing around it, I mean, it's quite a feat. It's really, really fun. And this particular rifle, like I said, it just seems to be an accurate model. It's definitely not a sniper rifle. It's not quite as precise as this one can be, but 3 MOA versus 2.5 really isn't that huge of a difference when it comes to a combat rifle. So this rifle, like I said, so the M1, it's a little bit less accurate, but not enough really for me to judge one being just inherently better than the other. The M1 also does have the bedding problems. If you read or listen to stories of guys from like Korea and early Vietnam when they were still qualifying with the M1, a lot of them had trouble because of the way the buttstock comes out. Just moving that stock in and out, it loosens up that bedding and makes your rifle get sloppier as you go. You don't hear a lot of people talking about that with the M1, I think mainly because of how fresh they were in World War II and Korea, that it wasn't such a big deal. Whereas the M14, because that's everyone's favorite rifle to pick on, even though most of the claims are horseshit, the M1 Garand shares the exact same issue. It's just not as frequently mentioned as the M14's is. So one of the narratives that's pushed out there is that, well, even though the U.S. had their semi-automatic capability, the German troopers and their doctrine around the Kar98K and Mauser variants, they required a higher level of marksmanship. They focused a lot more on precision shooting. Let's take a look at one of the tables that I've found for basic rifle qualification in the German Army. We'll see how that stacks up. So I will post the target and the qualification table that I had given to me by a friend Harrison. This may not have been the universal standard, but this will give us an idea of what they were training for. So the target itself is a Schützen style target. A lot of the classic German matches and competitions they would have would use these style of targets. The particular one that I have, we've been able to, through a little bit of research, we've been able to take this particular target and kind of get the dimensions for you. The inside bull of this head ring target is 5.5 inches, give or take. And so this head target would have been used for 4 of the 5 courses of fire. The 5th course of fire, which is standing at 100 meters, the target is designated as a ring target. I'm not sure which target that's referring to. The only target that we have the example of is what's called the head ring target for the first 4 courses of fire. Your max distance is 150 meters, or about 164 yards. Your minimum distance for a couple of them is 100 meters, and the 100-meter target is roughly 109 yards, give or take. So for the first event on the table, we have chest quickfire. What we've been able to decipher from that is you're basically starting at a high ready, but you're in the prone position. And the chest quickfire is like a snap up from that high ready on the ground and an unsupported prone shot. You have 4 rounds. You may not shoot outside the 8 ring. And this is at 100 meters. Minimum score is 32. Max score is 48. The 8 ring, so each ring on the outside is roughly equal to an inch. It's roughly, so each of the rings outside that 5.5 inch target is roughly an inch, inch and a quarter, give or take. So outside, no shot outside the 8 ring would have been roughly a 7 MOA group at 100 meters was required for that qualification. Then for the standing, like I said, this target, we do not have a representative for it. But the ring target, you get 4 shots, standing, slow fire. There's no rapid to this. There's no rapid movement or anything like that to this. And you're not allowed a shot under 6, or roughly a 9-inch group, give or take. So 9 MOA at 100 meters. If we're using the head ring target, the standard ring target, you can adjust those measurements for that. That's our rough estimation. For the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th courses of fire, we have 4 rounds each again. Prone supported, which is prone on like a sandbag or a little a log or something like that. Prone freehand would be just your elbows supporting the rifle. And then you have kneeling. Once again, these are all 4 shots apiece. For prone supported, you're not allowed a shot underneath 7. So if we translate that roughly, that's about an 8-inch circle. That's 5.3 MOA as well. And then you have your kneeling at 150 meters, 4 rounds, and you're not allowed a shot underneath 5. 5 would push you up to about 7 MOA, give or take. The scores, just to repeat them off for you, the 100-meter chest quickfire, 32 for a minimum score, 48 for a max score. For 150 meters, prone supported, minimum score is 28. The maximum score is 48. The maximum score for all these will be 48, so to not be redundant, we'll go with that. Prone freehand, your minimum score is 28. And for kneeling, your minimum score is 20. One really interesting thing you'll notice, and that I noticed when we were studying this chart, is that you're not allowed to miss. You cannot fully miss the target. That's a very important thing. They did require, that says that there is a required level of precision and competence that you must be able to at least hit the target. However, for these courses of fire, we do not know, we could not find how many times you were allowed to take this before you were decided whether you were going to be a truck driver or a cook, you know what I mean? So we can talk about that. They may have had multiple attempts to qualify. And this is just a basic initial rifle qualification. So they could have had different rifle qualifications that were more or less precise. They probably had a lot of, in-field training, like running and gunning kind of stuff when they were training to support the machine gun and whatnot, or fight with the machine gun. But that's our basic initial marksmanship that was required to be a Wermacht trooper. So now we'll move to the U.S. Army qualification standard for the M1. This qualification range program is extremely interesting. It was mainly adopted in 1903 with the 1903 Springfield. The traditional national match, that's the basis, that's when it was established in 1903. So nowadays, if you wanted to go shoot what is similar to the U.S. Army and U.S. Marine Corps qualification, you can go to the national match and shoot that. And it's very prestigious. That's really where, if you really want to learn the fundamentals of shooting, that's one of the disciplines that will get you down if you get really competitive with it. And it's one of my favorite ones to go shoot. I'll at least shoot one every year or two in between all the other different things that I'm doing, just to push myself and remember my fundamentals and practice. The U.S. Army was very flexible compared to other nations and like the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, you were shooting at either Parris Island or San Diego, MCRD San Diego, Camp Pendleton. So you had your fixed 500 meter KD ranges for there. The U.S. Army, being a lot more flexible, they have adjustments and scale targets where if all you have is a 50 yard range or a 1,000-inch range, they had scaled targets so they could do their qualification on. Before I get too ahead of myself, for 200 and 300 for your slow fire shots, you have standing, kneeling, and prone 200 and 300 yards on your slow fire targets. Each of those are 4 shots apiece. And then your rapid fire sessions would have been 10 rounds apiece. Basically, you're starting with 2 in the clip, loading it, shooting it, and then reloading. You're doing that at 200 and 300 yards as well. And for those targets, while you're trying to shoot those, you shoot those 10 rounds in 60 seconds or 1 minute. You're given a little bit more of a grace period with the target size, but going from, so at 200 yards, your target now becomes roughly a 10 MOA, 10 MOA in width, a little bit more than that, but not much. Target to hit for your aiming black. Your width for your 4 shot, your width for the 4 zone is about 15 MOA, a little bit more. Your width for your 3 zone now becomes roughly 21 MOA. At 300 yards for your rapid fire event, once again, you're shooting the exact same target you would at 300 yards. Your aiming black now becomes a little over 8 MOA. Then your 3 zone becomes a little more than 11 MOA, give or. And then your 3 zone at 300 yards becomes right at 14 MOA. So you're shooting the same target. Seems very big, but that starts to shrink as you go down in distance. And like I said, you have your wind calls that you have to start worrying about. But I mean, if you talk to PRS shooters like my good friend Great Value Varget, I mean, they're required to hit MOA, 2 MOA targets out to 600, 700, 800 yards, and they're doing it so easily and so quickly because those modern cartridges with extremely high ballistic coefficients and low recoil, they're able to spot their impacts. They're also able to really dial in perfectly with their outstanding glass that they have on those rifles. So it looks easy from the modern standpoint, but not only from the historical standpoint and from the sighting system that you're using, that feat starts looking quite a bit more impressive on both ends for both the Wermacht's 100 meter and 150 meter targets and for the U.S. So if we go by just the precision standard alone, this is where it gets interesting because the U.S. does allow for misses in their qualification. You are shooting quite a bit bigger targets but you're also shooting them at a further distance where with wind and your elevation holdovers become a deal. The variance in the ammunition really start at 200 yards. The variance in ammunition probably wouldn't be as big of a deal, but definitely at 300, slight variances in velocity, that along with the wind and your holdover, that fudge factor that you might have had at the closer distance really starts to go away. You have to really be switched on for what you're doing. We can talk that, yes, the German qualification does not allow for misses, and it definitely only allows for a certain parameter of error in your shooting course. However, for both rapid fire and slow fire for the US, you have a little bit larger target, but you also have environmentals that you have to start worrying about, which for good shooters, that really means nothing. Shooters that understand their rifles and their equipment very, very well, that's not that much of a struggle. You still had a lot of guys in the Marine Corps, even before ACOGs came out, shooting out to 500 meters and qualifying expert all day long. But it does kind of put into perspective that this target, while it seems large to a higher end, higher tuned shooter, to your new GI who may have been a tailor before he was drafted, has quite a feat ahead of him. So with all of that, we've talked about the qualification, we've talked about the introductory history of the rifles and some of their handling characteristics and the actions and whatnot. But I'm going to kind of sit on the fence on that one and just say both of them, I believe they were adequately trained to be good marksmen. And both programs had their potential to put out some outstanding shooters. It's really, really hard to argue that they were objectively better trained marksmen than the American GIs. While I was kicking back and forth the idea of doing this video, I wanted to do a real world example of what they would have been facing. So the fun example that we're going to use to compare both of these rifles is the most popular example of World War II, Omaha Beach. So thanks to a good friend of the channel, Michael Ackerman, he directed the movie Reveille. Outstanding film, you should go watch it, especially if you really like extreme attention to detail when it comes to a historical movie. It's a very, very good movie. Once again, Mr. Ackerman, he provided us with a couple of really good aerial photographs. This aerial photograph is taken in La Roquette, or WN65 on the German side, or the Easy Red sector where the famous Big Red 1 landed. And on the other side of the screen, you'll see some pictures that I took from Google Earth from the perspective of what that terrain would have looked like on Omaha Beach, kind of from a side view. Also, if you look off to the side of the aerial photograph, Michael Ackerman let me use one of his really, really amazing illustrations of one of the machine gun nests that would have been used at WN65. And in that picture, it shows the captured French machine gun that they used. They reused a lot of French, British, and even Polish firearms. As you'll see, Polish WZ-29s being used on the Atlantic Wall as well. So from the trenches or the fighting positions at WN65, where your riflemen would have been stationed, and your organic machine gun crews, mortar crews, people like that, the start of that to the beginning of the beach where they would have landed at low tide, that distance I've calculated it out to be about 400 yards. So if we look at the top of the ridge where the start of the fighting positions were, where most of your German infantrymen would have been, from there to the low tide spot roughly where Big Red 1 would have came in, you have about 400 yards of distance that both of these rifles would have had to contend with. So from the start of the firing positions, the Wermacht had 400 yards to shoot down onto the beach where the landing craft would have dropped off the troops at low tide. Same thing vice versa. You'll see there's a little bit of an elevation difference in the beach. However, when I put this into the Hornady ballistics calculator, it didn't make that much of a difference. So from the Wermacht perspective, I know for a fact that they had range cards and probably, and they had their distances marked out with stakes and whatnot, so they could tell what to adjust the sights on their machine guns were. However, for your average infantryman, I'm not really sure if they would have been using their ladder sight or not. We will assume that they didn't. If you have photographs or something like that to prove that they were using the ladder sight at their points, I'll gladly take that correction. Anytime I can learn more, I'd love to. So if they did not, the base of the ladder sight is 100 meters. With that 100 meter zero at 400 yards, the SMK 177 grain ammunition would have dropped roughly 39 inches in flight. If they did not have their sights preset, the Kentucky windage on that would have been about to put the tip of their front sight post right about at the head level. Head, lower neck area, basically they would have to cover the entire body. You can see my really, really crude sketch of what that might have looked like with some translucent sights. Your front sight post would be completely covering the body of the target. You'd basically just be trying to put the lollipop on top of the barleycorn sight and hope for the best. And obviously as they closed in, that distance would have been less, and I'm sure by that time the Germans were maneuvering to different fighting positions and stuff like that. But that's the start of where they are. I'll also post the ballistic charts with these zeros in the upper hand corner of the screen, so you can see how much these cartridges would have been dropping with their particular zero. The Kar98K for a 100 meter zero. The USGIs, on the other hand, would have been zeroing their M1s for 200 meters. So from the view of the Big Red 1, you could see their sight picture would have been much, much more difficult. So as you can see from their view, in the modern photograph, there's a lot of overgrown brush. There's trees and whatnot there that may or may not have been there where the fighting positions were. And if they were lucky in those escarpments, they might have only been able to see the head moving, maybe the mid-torso, rushing around or hopping out of the trench to move somewhere else. Y'all have to forgive me that there's a train that's just deciding to pass by. So if we assume that the guys of the Big Red 1 were able to get their rifles ready to fire literally as they were stepping out of the landing craft, which is a very big if, with their 200-yard zero, they would have been dropping right at 26 inches. So even if they were able to see the head or the upper torso of the Wermacht troopers, you can see in the illustration I made of the front sight post that you would be covering that man at that distance. You would not be able to see through them. That's not quite to scale. I'm not the best with Photoshop, so the front sight blade might have been a little bit thinner, but you're basically still aiming over the top of them, and you have no reference point to do your holdover with. So even if you're dropping quite a bit less with that zero, so 26 inches with your 200 meter zero and your M1, even though that seems a little bit easier because you have less to hold over, you're dealing with an enemy you basically can't see. I'm sure as they got closer, or as the enemy started getting agitated and wanted to move to different positions, they would have gotten more opportunities. So maybe if you had a sharpshooter that got to some sort of piece of cover and was able to take those shots immediately, he's got quite a bit of a chore figuring out where those 8mm rounds are coming from. And even if he did, it would have been very, very hard for them to pinpoint a good, precise hold to make those shots effectively. And that also doesn't take into effect all of the artillery, the noise of the boats, the water, seasickness. So you have quite a, it's basically an impossible task. So basically the main impossible task that they talk about D-Day should be they can't see what they're shooting at, or it was very, very difficult for them, to say the least. Now, as they closed that distance, got closer to those fighting positions, if the Wermacht troopers did not fall back to a different position, if they maintained that, as the M1 gets closer, that firepower, that semi-automatic capability of being able to suppress take quick follow-up shots, or even double tap if you get really close to somebody. That's where that really starts to come into play. And the GIs, as they get closer, the advantage is. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. Hope you've seen a new perspective into these firearms that you hadn't seen before. Comment which of these two that you would pick, which one is your favorite. And I could care less if there's logic behind it. If you think one is cooler than the other, I'm super down with that. I get it. I was the same way when I bought these. As soon as I was old enough to start buying guns, I started getting these surplus guns. They're both equal in my eyes as far as the cool factor. The usability factor, I've got to give it to the M1. That M1 had definitely won World War II for us. And so I'm declaring, therefore, the M1 won World War II. Obviously, it's more nuanced than that, and there's more things out there than just the infantry rifles. So don't get bent out of shape. We're having fun here. All things considered, it was the future. And the M1, its action and its inspiration lives on in quite a few firearms today. You have the M1A, which, depending on who you ask, is awesome or is a pile of shit. There's the Mini 14, which, once again, depending on who you ask, it's the coolest thing since sliced bread or it's a pile of shit. Or the Kalashnikov family, which, if you didn't know, the design of the Kalashnikov bolt is basically an M1 Garand upside down. That's, you know, history and firearms evolution for you right there. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much to Mike's Militaria, for giving me some of these that I could purchase and have for a video prop and do research with. Very special thank you to Michael Ackerman for giving me the lowdown on Omaha Beach and showing me a couple of those aerial photographs. And also, thank you to Harrison the Midget in our Discord channel about sharing with me the German rifle qualification, which, if I didn't have that, I would not be able to make this video because I would have no comparison to do as far as the GIs are concerned. Thank you very much. Y'all have a good one. Goodbye.